Okay, hello and welcome to our architectural conservation class. Um, Today we will be talking about assessment of significance. Okay, and our objectives for this lecture are fourfold. First, we want to know the concept of cultural significance, and then we learn how to assess cultural significance, and then we will try to know the common issues in assessing cultural significance, and finally to study a sample form for assessing cultural significance used locally. So as much as possible, I will be using local examples, especially because in our last lecture, we talked about the practice of conservation, and then we try to contextualize it to the Philippine setting. Therefore, everything else from now on will be contextualized into the Philippine setting. So the first topic in this lecture is the concept of cultural significance. The Bura Charter defines cultural significance as the sum of the qualities or values that a place has, including the five values of aesthetic, historic, scientific, social, and spiritual that are listed in Article 1.2 of the Bura Charter. So what is this Article 1.2? It says cultural significance means aesthetic, historic, scientific, social, or spiritual value for past, present, or future generations. Therefore, take note that the present or future generation is included. So the concern of architectural or the concern of heritage conservation is actually more um, is not limited only to the past. No? Therefore, it's always wrong to say that conservation is like backward looking or anti-development because it is like fixated on the past only and not thinking of our concerns in the present or in the future. Also, by now you have must have noticed that only five values were mentioned: aesthetic, historic, scientific, social, or spiritual. So these are minimum values. We can actually add more if you want. Um, and most of the time, this will depend on the project and also on the client. For example, if they have another value which you think should be separated in terms of assessment. So cultural significance is embodied in the place itself, its fabric, setting, use, association, meaning, records, related places, and related objects. Further, it says places may have a range of values for different individuals or groups. So therefore, it is not possible to cut and paste the cultural significance of one heritage resource to another because they really differ in all aspects. Okay. Now I have shown you this a diagram, which is the Bura Charter process. And it says here that the understanding of significance is the first two steps uh, in this process. So first we understand the place, which is where we define the place and in extent, investigate the place, its history, use, association, and fabric. And then we assess the cultural significance, and then we assess our values using relevant criteria, develop a statement of significance. So there are indications on the articles where you can find the discussion in the Bura Charter. And I already gave you a copy of the Bura Charter, so you please do a study on your own about this. So, with regards to terminologies, there's only the terms cultural significance, cultural heritage value, and heritage significance are often used interchangeably. Okay, so please don't get confused. The Burat Charter uses cultural significance as the term that brings together all the cultural values of the place. And this is also how we're going to use the term in our class. If I, for some reason, interchange it with other terms like cultural significance, I mean cultural heritage value and heritage significance. So just at least you know that I actually mean the cultural significance. So many places will have both natural and cultural values. For indigenous people, for example, natural and cultural values may be indivisible. Okay, so other people may have different ways of expressing it or defining the terms. However, we will stick to this for our lectures. So the five values or these five terms which are listed alphabetically in the Burra Charter are often included in Australian heritage legislation. So if you remember, the Burra Charter was actually developed in Australia, and a lot of what I'm teaching you today is actually came from there. No? In fact, I will be giving an example um, from Australia. Um, So, though some jurisdictions include extra terms such as architectural or archaeological value, this is what I meant earlier. And in the example I will be giving, there are actually like more than five values. Criteria are also used to help define cultural and natural significance, and there is now a nationally agreed set of heritage assessment criteria. This is what I will be showing you earlier. Each of these criteria may have tangible and intangible aspect, and it is essential that both are acknowledged. So the intangible is also something that must be considered because it's part of our heritage. Let's start with aesthetic value. Okay, so the questions asked when we try to assess the aesthetic values are the following. Does the place have special compositional or uncommonly attractive qualities involving combination of color, texture, spaces, massing, detail, movement, sound, texture, um, sense, texture, space, massing, detail, movement, unity, sound, and sense. No? Is the place distinctive within the setting or a prominent visual landmark? So, uh, from reading all of these questions, probably you might be able to imagine some heritage resource that you know that would fit probably or that would give a positive answer to these questions. So does the place have qualities which are inspirational or which evoke strong feelings or special meaning? So some of the monuments, for example, especially that they're really designed to be aesthetic, would fall into this. No? Is the place symbolic for its aesthetic qualities? For example, does it inspire artistic or cultural response? Is it represented in art, photography, literature, folk art, folklore, methodology, or other imagery or cultural arts? So another way to assess the resource is whether it's been often featured in magazines or like nowadays Instagram or Facebook. So if they are so or especially in websites or any literature that is supposed to represent the place, no, the municipality or maybe the region or even the country. Therefore it has aesthetic value because it's been photographed. Does the place display particular aesthetic characteristics of an identified style or fashion? Does the place show a high degree of creative or technical achievement? So the question is the place, no? I've been mentioning the place because um, remember the definition of place in Bura Charter is not only the lot, no, the property, which is in real estate, but it actually means the object itself. No, the resource itself is the place. So that whenever we put it, so the place changes it's because it's the object itself. And in the case of intangible heritage, it's actually the performance itself, wherever it is performed or it is manifested. No, that would be the place. Imagine, for example, this is El Nido, okay, and it's often advertised, especially in tourism. And then when we talk about the Philippines, so we show this as one of our pride that we have this. So it now has aesthetic significance, okay, because it's always been used. Um, and imagine if someone were to put a building somewhere there in that picture, so it would really destroy everything. Okay, so you would no longer be able to use this picture or that setting. So static values refers to the sensory and perceptual experience of a place. That is how we respond to visual and non-visual aspects such as sound, smell, and other factors having a strong impact on human thoughts, feelings, and attitude. So it's interesting that aesthetic value is not limited to visual. So even sound and smell and even taste. Therefore, food, for example, so you don't just photograph the food, you also taste it, you smell it. So, so it's really different. For example, you have a very beautiful view, but then part of the appreciation of a view is the smell that comes with it. But then when you try to smell something went wrong that that brings you out of your nostalgia. So therefore we have to get rid of that, no? So there's a figure in nearby, a very beautiful view of supposedly flowers, and you're supposed to be smelling flowers. Aesthetic qualities may include the concept of beauty and formal aesthetic ideas, and expressions of aesthetic are culturally influenced. Um, what does this mean? Expressions of aesthetic are culturally influenced. The way we see beauty might differ according differ by different culture. No? Therefore, we have to learn. If we are the outsider, we have to learn to appreciate how the other, the culture, perceived what is beautiful. Okay, we will not judge it according to our culture as an outsider. We will judge it according to the culture, their culture, okay, and appreciate it as that. Case in point is the Venus of Willendorf. Okay, um, I'm sure this has been mentioned in your art hist class, and the Venus of Willendorf is supposed to be the representation of what is beautiful of a beautiful woman during the time it was made, and it's a bulbous figure, therefore it's a fat woman. And our standards nowadays probably that will not pass as something beautiful. Okay, but we celebrate the Venus of Willendorf for its uh, historic value, aesthetic value, for its cultural significance. So I did mention historic value. So when we assess historic value, we ask these questions. Is the place associated with an important event or theme in history? So there's a very big theme, for example, in Japan, the bombing of Hiroshima. And so there is always this building which is shown publicly, and it's actually being preserved because the moment you see that building, you're reminded of the bombing of Hiroshima. It's actually the building right in under the bomb, because the bomb blew, exploded uh, on the air, okay, not on the ground. So, and right below where it was supposed to land, there's a building, and then for some reason, some of the walls are intact, and even the frame of its roof, no? And so they preserve the ruins. So is the place important in showing patterns in development of history locally in a region or on a statewide or national or global basis? Okay. Um, there might be, well, I have an example later that is related to this. No? Does the place show a high degree of creative or technical achievement for a particular period? For example, if this was the time that printing press was made, So that's a very big deal. No? Is the place associated with a particular person or cultural group important in the history of the local area, state, nationality, or nationally or globally? Um, any place where Jose Rizal might have gone to becomes uh, a place of historic value. Okay, in Dumaguete, for example, so he landed there. Okay, and it's even mentioned in his memoirs. So therefore, that forms part of the narrative of the significance of that place. This is the Jesuit house, and it is very historic, especially because of the medallion that you see here on top of the door towards the right. No? You see a circle, and then the words Anyo, and then the numbers 1730, and so that sort of dates the house to be constructed around that time in 1730. Now that's pretty old for our standard because other countries have older. So historic value is intended to encompass all aspects of history. For example, history of aesthetic, arts and architecture, science, spirituality, and society. It is therefore often underlies other values. So normally everything which has heritage value um, will have historic value also. Um, so we're not limited to architecture and arts. So it says here that even in science, no, and spirituality. So when a religion started, for example, is of cultural significance, or when something was invented, is of cultural significance. A place may have historic value because it has influenced or has been influenced by an historic event, phase, movement, or activity, persons or group of people. It may be the site of an important event. Okay, it may be the site of an important event. No, I just can't think of anything else. But this building, for example, the Gochauco building, which is now the Museum for Chinese Heritage in Cebu, this is at the back of the City Hall, or at least fronting the annex building, which is at the back of the Legislative building of City Hall. Um, so it's now fully restored and now open, and I hope for those who are in Cebu, you can visit this. This is a project very close to my heart. No? This was destroyed during the war, but then the facade remained. But when they rebuilt it during the war, instead of a three-story building, they made it into a five-story building. So you can imagine that instead of a two-story here with the windows, so they made windows there like three or four windows here. You know? So they brought back the facade. And then, although the build inside, I think it is still more than three stories. No? You can see the level of the floors through the window. So they brought it back, but they did not bring it back to really how it was when it was originally made because there used to be a lantern here. Okay, so they brought it back only to that point because at certain point the lantern also disappeared, and so they made this um, to that time after the disappearance. Okay, so there's an additional structure which is actually separate from the building just to protect the main entrance. So this is new. So why is this historical significant? It's because this is the one who had this built is one of those like the taipans, no, of the Chinese. Among the Chinese, is very significant. He is the father of the owner of Robinsons, and is a very prominent figure. And also, the building itself is where most of the um, companies that are now doing well, and even like Arbeco, even the Boitices, I think, started their companies here, and then a lot of things. Shipping companies started here, then they move out, and then they flourished. When we assess in terms of scientific value, the question would be, would further investigation of the place have the potential to reveal substantially new information and new understanding about people, place, process, or practices which are not available from other sources? Okay. It says the scientific value refers to the information content of a place and its ability to reveal more about an aspect of the past through examination or investigation of the place, including the use of archaeological techniques. Okay, so normally it refers to archaeological investigation, although it not necessarily, because if the object is already um, above ground, not underground, no, that you don't need to excavate it. So you need to uh, examine its historical value and scientific value also. The picture I'm showing here is the diggings made in the Bolon Church complex, because history uh, narrates that there used to be a community outside along this place. So, so our historians would like to know more about that community, you know? Well, just to understand more, because right now there's no trace of it above ground. The relative scientific value of the place is likely to depend on the importance of the information or data involved, on its rarity, quality, or representativeness, and its potential to contribute further important information about the place itself or a type of class of place, or to address important research questions. So there are many discoveries that can affect so many historical narratives. Okay, for example, you might discover something that may prove that Jose Rizal visited this place and it was never mentioned in any of his writings or in any of the future or biographical narratives about him. So that's a big discovery. To establish potential, it may be necessary to carry out some form of testing or sampling. For example, in the case of an archaeological site, this could be established by test excavation. Although the ones I'm presenting here, which is in Callao Cave, is no longer a test. No, I think this is a full-blown excavation, archaeological excavation. Um, there was actually a point in time when I wanted to become an archaeologist. Is the place important as a local marker or symbol? So this is one of the questions asked when we assess the social value. Okay. Um, Aside from markers actually installed by the national agencies, there are actually markers which are very important um, by from the locals, no? Especially landmarks. It could be a well, for example. In a community, the well becomes very important because that's where they gather, that's their source of water. And so if you remove that, somehow you disrupt a whole system, no? Uh, a whole culture, the time, because it, for example, it affects their schedule. At a certain time, they go somewhere, they go to this place because it's either to fetch water or to talk to someone who's already there at this time also, etc. So that's the domino effect. Is the place important as part of community identity or the identity of a particular cultural group? Is the place important to a community or cultural group because of associations and meanings developed from long use and association? So even associations, no, it's not actually the made by a group, but then it's associated with them, um, and it can have a social value. Social value refers to the association, no, that a place has for a particular community or cultural group, that the social or cultural meanings that it holds for them. If these if this place of, or this group, for example, of people have been doing this kind of industry in the past and it has become their way of living, and especially if it becomes known and also in demand. So there is a need to conserve that culture, that technology, or that practice. In this case, the hamamapon mat weaving. Um, Around the Philippines, we have these schools of living tradition, which are a project of the National Culture for National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Okay, so the important way of preserving something like this is when it is taught to young people, and so they carry on the legacy. Okay, so if you notice, these are young women learning how to make the banig, the mat, no, of their style. So there's a sample on the wall. Spiritual value. Okay, does the place contribute to the spiritual identity or belief system of a cultural group? Is the place a repository of knowledge, traditional arts, or lore related to spiritual practice of a cultural group? So is the place important in maintaining the spiritual health and well-being of a cultural group? Now, we're not limiting ourselves to Christianity, Catholicism. We are talking even about the spiritual practices of our ancestors, which are mostly are animists. No? That's why even the belief in in ghosts or other creatures, which we are probably still afraid of, monsters, exotic balang, and all of that. The root of all of this belief becomes also culturally significant. The physical attributes of the place play a role in recalling or awakening an understanding of an individual or a group's relationship with the spiritual realm. The spiritual values of the place find expression in cultural practices of or human-made structures or inspire creative works. So I think it's best to show some examples. Um, this is Buklog, Thanksgiving ritual system. Um, in this community, for example, the the practice of building a house is also related um, to religious rites. Okay, and I read that even in Muslims there are also ways. No, once you put the um, a post, it has to be done in a sequence. It has to be done in a certain manner. And then you have to have rituals. Some would sacrifice animal blood. Others would put something on the foundation. In this case, they have no. They're now um, it includes dance. No, it's not only done individually but by the group. So spiritual value refers to the intangible values and meanings embodied in or evoked by a place which give it importance in the spiritual identity or the traditional knowledge, art, and practices of a cultural group. Um, Another very famous is the devotion to Santo Niño. Okay, among the Catholics, we all are familiar probably with the uh, origin of the Santo Niño in Cebu. But then it's celebrated even outside of Cebu, no? At Atihan, for example. Truthfully, I'm not familiar with the origin of the dance in Atihan, whether they are celebrating the one in Cebu or it's somewhere outside. Okay, so how do we assess cultural significance? So first is how to locate the cultural significance. No? The Buddha Charter says that cultural significance is embodied in the place, its public setting, use, association, and meaning. So we already mentioned this earlier. In fact, that's why I and then I also said that the place moves around wherever the object is because the object or the heritage resource itself is the place. Uh, Along with it comes its cultural significance. So it may exist in objects at the place or association with it in other places that have some relationship to the place and in activities and traditional and customary practices that may occur at the place or that are dependent on the place. What I'm showing here is the Punta Cruz in Maribojoc, Bohol. It is a watchtower, and then aside from the fact that it is old, it also symbolize the an event in the past where during the Spanish period when the Spaniards were concentrating on defending itself, no, the Philippines or its territory from the Moros. So they put up watchtowers to see whether some of the invaders are coming because they normally come by the sea. And much later, so there's a story behind that. No? Much later, one of the priests developed a system of actually um, protecting the town and defending the town by um, by organizing a fleet also of locals who will meet the invaders halfway, and then a battle will ensue on the sea instead, so to prevent them from landing on the ground. But at the same time, the people on the ground are asked to go to the church for protection, so to evacuate and then to go to the church and uh, so where it is safe for them. A place may have multiple aspects of significance, and this may or may not be interdependent. So the process of assessing cultural significance should include defining the tangible and intangible attributes that embody each aspect of cultural significance. Again, the picture I'm showing a very famous landmark in Cebu, the Fuente Osmania. Okay, so aside from the fact that it is a node because it is circular, it is a a roundabout. Um, I forgot what's this called. Sorry, but the the fountain itself, which is no longer functioning as a fountain, um, used to mark the start of the water system in Cebu City. Okay, so there used to be a pipe that connects this to the dam, I think the Mahina Dam, somewhere near, or somewhere actually it's far, no? But they have to bring that pipe all the way here so that it can feed the fountain. So it has cultural significance. So how is it assessed? Okay, so the steps are first to analyze the evidence gathered through physical investigation of the place, research and consultation, and then to evaluate its qualities against a set of criteria that are established for this purpose. The place may be of cultural significance if it satisfies one or more of these criteria, and then satisfying more criteria does not mean a place is necessarily more significant. It might be a surprise that, say, the example that I will give, there is more than, say, out of 10 criteria, you only need to satisfy one to have cultural significance. Um, this is the example that I mentioned earlier. This is in Queensland Heritage Council, their methodology for establishing cultural significance um, for the sole purpose of registering the heritage resource in their registry. So, which we call here in the Philippines as the pre-cook. Um, the process is simply first is apply significance indicator, and then next is apply threshold indicator, and finally, uh, satisfaction of um, is determined. Okay, so there are um, 10 criterion in the what Queensland Heritage Council, and I'm showing only one criteria here, one criterion. There are 10 criteria. Okay, and then these are the significance indicators. So for each criterion, you have a set of indicators. They are not the same for each, no? So they differ. And then there's also a set of threshold indicators. Okay, again, they are not the same for each criterion, so they differ. And the criterion, if this is satisfied, um, will give you the historical and scientific significance. So there's a type of significance that is given, which I will show for each criterion. So it has to satisfy all of this to have that significant indicator. And if none, so take a look at this, and if there's none, so it does not satisfy criterion A. These are the different criteria. There are 10 of them, so the place is important in demonstrating evolution or pattern of Queensland history. That's exactly what we have here. And then all the way to 10. So just read them at your leisure later on. I will be giving you a copy of the example. It's a book. It's really very thick, but you can browse through it and just scan it. And then for each criteria here, um, if this is satisfied, then you'll have the heritage resource will have defined historical and scientific significance at one time. Or if this is satisfied, it satisfies all of these values here. So they have one, two, three, four, five, six values. They have other significance. Um, they don't have the spiritual significance. Instead, they have the architectural significance. Okay, and then there are some which only satisfies one. For example, criterion G will give you only the social significance, and criterion H will only give you a historical significance. Okay, so after doing all of that, you come up with a statement of significance. So, what is a statement of significance? A statement of significance provides a concise and distilled summary of the cultural significance of the place. So, there are so many, there are five here or six, but then you have to make a general statement that involves all of them. But then you also have to break them down, no, for each one. It is common practice for the statement of significance to follow an analysis of each aspect of significance against each value or criterion. So this comes after an assessment. It's like the conclusion. The statement of significance summarizes each aspect, highlighting the aspect of significance that are most important. The statement of significance underpins decisions about statutory protection and conservation actions and is therefore of critical importance. It should be supported by sound evidence and be able to withstand scrutiny. Okay, here is an example from the same Queensland Heritage Register. So this is the heritage resource. These are some of the pertinent information. And then there is the statement of significance, no? And then in the statement of significance, it is said that it is based on criteria A, B, C, D, and H. If you recall, there are A to H, so there's no E, F, G. No? So these are the only ones that apply for criteria. And then for each criterion, um, there is a narrative, no, of why, of how the heritage resource satisfies that criterion. And then this is based on the analysis later on. No? This is based on what was discussed here, where it fits in any of these questions, or of these indicators and where it fits also in these indicators. So, for example, if it's supposed to be rare, what makes it, how is it rare? So let's now discuss the common issues in assessing cultural significance. Now, there is no good way of doing this. I will just list down one issue after another. There are quite a lot, and I'll just comment on some of them. Okay, for example, one issue is that underlying research is not adequate. So some assessment of cultural significance are based on inadequate research, meaning that the assessment made cannot be relied upon. So maybe there's not the researcher is not competent uh, or did not do his work properly. So the assessment of cultural significance is now inadequate or requires review. So after some time, the cultural significance has to be updated, okay, because there might be new discoveries or because the heritage resource might not be maintained properly, so there might be some loss, which sort of changes its significance. Then there's incomplete assessment, so only partial, not everything is covered. Then avoiding preconceptions, assessing cultural significance requires careful process of analysis. So we cannot make use of just rules of thumb. It has to be based on uh, careful analysis. Not say, you know, um, even the um, I cannot think of a rule of thumb. Maybe like if everyone does things this way now, so you assume that it is already that is also being done in the past, and so you create a historical narrative based on that. No? And even if there are evidences that may prove otherwise. So engaging with diverse form of knowledge and cultural perspective. So assessment is requires the assessor to be responsive to different sources of knowledge and different ways of perceiving the values of the place. So the issue here might be not engaging with diverse forms. No? The condition of a place can also be an issue because it says here that the physical condition of a place does not generally influence its significance, but will often be a factor in determining policy for the place. Okay, like for example, that building that marks the bombing of Hiroshima that I mentioned earlier. So just because it is already in ruins doesn't mean that it has lost its historical significance. Um, so even if it was completely, probably if it was completely ruined and there's only really very few things that you can see there and that you can preserve, that still marks the place where the bomb was supposed to fall. So there is still the cultural significance. The assessment lacks logic, is poorly argued, or is too subjective. So it's the way that the assessor writes the report. The place is too narrowly defined. Importance of involving those with associations and knowledge. Probably um, there are supposed to be experts and they're supposed to be available, and yet they were not considered in the consultations. And sometimes this happens. I actually have a first-hand experience on this because these experts, they're all human, and then being human, they err a lot. No, they sometimes fight among themselves. So if you're working for this person, and then this expert is here, and you're supposed to consult them, but this person does not like this person, and then you're told, do not consult. You cannot get anything. Even if I did consult, and then I submit my report, and there's a possibility that they may remove the commentary because simply they don't like each other. So childishness, no? But anyway, that happens. Social value is not well assessed. The assessor lacks all the skills needed. Okay, this is also true if you're not studying very well and someone actually approach you to assess something and then you get the project and then you don't consult. So it's a problem. Recognizing intangible heritage. So there are some people who cannot recognize an intangible heritage. Like I was watching a webinar and then the researcher was talking about it's supposed to be like pamahiin, but he calls it heresies. Uh, but pamahiin are like superstitions, and heresies are actually like a statement against a established or accepted teaching, especially among the Catholics. So if you're going to say that Jesus um, is not God, is only man, so that goes against a teaching, so that's a heresy. But then a superstition is simply like, okay, if your stairs fall on multiples of three, that's bad luck. So something like that. Anyway, so he was talking a lot about many things, and then he was telling us how many people did not recognize that what they were saying were actually heresies or supposedly superstitious belief. And that was his research about. No? So some researcher might not easily recognize. Um, there might be a dance, for example, and he's gotten used to seeing this person dance this, and they did not research that this is actually a very old dance, the very old expression of a certain dance. Okay, that could have been a good research. Natural values are ignored. So just like some intangibles, um, natural things, no, because again we get used to our surroundings. Okay, we get used to the view, we get used to the tree, we get used to anything around us, and that's why sometimes we need to invite outsiders to tell us what they notice. And it's a good thing if we are the assessor that the place that we're assessing is not familiar to us. And if it is, then we should bring along or invite someone who is not familiar to it and we observe the reaction. Okay. And to try to discover what is it that you had taken for granted. The statement of significance failed to answer why a place is significant and the scientific value is misunderstood. Okay, so because here no, it says that scientific value of a place refers to its potential to yield information about the past through investigation. So it's not only like an invention, something new and innovative, but it's more of what we can discover about the past also. Okay, so it's not always looking forward on the future. So we go to our last topic, which is a sample assessment form. I showed you how assessment is done in Australia. Although I did not go to the details, it's because it's a very big process and we're not going to use it here anyway, unless the government requires it. But at the same time, the government does not really have a standard way of assessing heritage um, resources. So I developed my own. And then the teachers here have been developing their own. And then hopefully one of these will find its way into MCCA and probably be adopted. No? Okay, these are just again information like the one I showed earlier that shows details, address, type, date, the owner, then the pictures, and then a description, then what material, what condition, what modification, and then the assessment of significance. You have to fill in this table So here it's different. So instead of writing about each of these aspects here or values, we do a scoring, numerical scoring. So, or in this case, it's like, uh, so if it's very significant, so we put the score here. It's moderately, actually, I think here we only put one or two numbers, and then we total, and then we also score for representation, whether it's rare or intact. Okay, and then we summarize, and then depending on the summary of cultural significance, um, we recommend the management of significance. Okay, so this is the management of significance, whether it's demolition, conservation, preservation, reconstruction, adaptation, restoration, maintenance, or simply making a conservation plan. There can be more than one type of management, as long as they don't. For example, you can conserve and maintain, reconstruct, and adapt on like a conservation plan. Um, but this is part of our lectures, feature lecture, I think, in the last part. No? And then discuss the expected management here, then site location, then submitted by. Now, when we go back to this, it becomes very difficult to put a score. Okay, how would you know if it's moderate, or it's contributory? Um, so you need some guide. That's why we developed this guide. For example, in historic significance, okay, so there are some criteria. If it fits here, has influence or has been influenced by historic figure, event, or phase or of history or era, then if it is not applicable, we take off the zero. But if it is very applicable, so it is high, says high applicability, so we take this off. Okay. Um, and then that's the same for all the other significance: aesthetic, social, technical, and urban. So notice that here, what we developed, or what I developed here, no, is historic, aesthetic, social. I do not have the spiritual, and I do not have the scientific. The technical is more the scientific, and then there is an urban, which is actually related a little on social, but more of architectural. So this can be changed depending on you as an assessor. But if you change it, therefore you have to provide the corresponding guide here. So you have assessment of whatever significance that you are adding. Okay, so we have that, and then the scores are here, and then they're totaled. So the way this is scored is that if there is at least one uh, check mark here, the score is one here below. So no, the score is this one. So there is a 4 here. Okay. As long as there is one check mark here, the score is 1. As long as there's a check mark here, the score is 2. Then so you add up everything and you see the total scores here. And so we look at the significance. No? And so the total score is what you put back in this table. Um, well, this is now the summary of those. And then for the architectural significance, which is also at the other side. So this is more, this, I did not have a guide for this. So this one will be more, depends on the expertise of the experience of the assessor, to see, and also his study, to see how rare it is or how intact the heritage resource is, and then it's totaled. And once the two are totaled, the cultural significance and the architectural significance, So we come up with a total score here, and we're supposed to look at table 2. This is this is now table 1 and 2. For table 1, the level of cultural significance. We use this every time we get the total scores for each of the value. Like this case of urban significance, once we get the total value here, we go to table 1 to determine whether it is very significant, moderately significant, or contributory. The table 2 we use in this one. After we total the cultural and architectural significance, we take a look whether um, where it fits here, whether it is in categories A to D, whether it's very high, high, moderate, medium. If it falls in the category D, so it means that it is not included in the study because there is no significance. Now, there is supposed to be a corresponding description for categories A, B, and C, which will state the policies acceptable in terms of management, whether it should be preserved or it can be reconstructed or adapted or whatever. However, it is not, I was not able to include this in the slides, but I will include that in the document that I will share with you later. Now I will incorporate it in that one because I will be sharing um, the documents which serves as my reference for this lecture. Basically, that was it. And next meeting, I think, will be our uh, midterm exam, but I will check and I will just post an announcement if it is and how we are going to book about it. Okay. I forgot. We're supposed to, as a final step, no, we're supposed to write the statement of significance. So we first write a general statement of significance, and then we talk about the architectural significance on our basis for scoring it in terms of parity and intactness. And we're supposed to also elaborate on our basis for our scores in the values, heritage values, the 5 that we have. So this time, this is the last slide, no? Okay. So see you next week. Thank you very much for um, watching this video, and I hope you study for our exam.